Section 6.1 talks about wages and salaries, basically how someone might calculate your paycheck. In the first question, we're given directions. We have an employee. Its overtime is calculated as any hours over 40 in a week, so that's really important information, how overtime is calculated. The other part that's really important here is what overtime is paid. So overtime is paid at time and a half. Okay, and we'll talk about both of those pieces. So part A says find the number of regular hours worked, and part B says find the number of overtime hours worked. So what we want to do is we want to calculate all the hours worked in a week, and then we're going to split it up into some of those are regular hours and some of those are overtime hours. Remember that the first 40 are considered regular, and anything above the 40 hours would be considered overtime. So let's add all those hours from Monday through Saturday. When I calculate all of those, okay, I end up with 46.25 hours. 40 of those hours go for regular hours, and then the remaining, if we take 46.25 and subtract the 40 regular, we end up with 6.25 hours that are overtime. And I'm going to abbreviate OT for overtime. So here's our 6.25 hours of overtime. So if you add up the regular hours and the overtime hours, that would be the total hours in the week. Part C is asking to find the overtime rate. So when you work overtime, you get above your regular rate of pay. So our regular rate of pay is $9.48. To calculate our overtime rate, that's given to us in the directions to say that we have overtime paid at time and a half. Time and a half is like saying 1.5. And so if we take 1.5 times the $9.48 that would typically get paid, we end up with $14.22 per overtime hour. Part D says find the regular earnings. So we're going to look at taking our regular rate of pay and multiplying that times our number of regular hours. The regular rate of pay in our question is $9.48, and we're going to multiply that by the 40 regular hours. I get $379.20. For the overtime earnings, we're going to take our overtime rate of pay and we're going to multiply that by the number of overtime hours worked. We just calculated our overtime rate of pay as $14.22. And we're going to multiply that by the 6.25 overtime hours. And I end up with $88.88. The last part of question 1 says find the total gross earnings. So in order to do this, we're going to take our regular pay and add our overtime pay. Our regular pay from Part D was $379.20. Our overtime pay from Part E was $88.88. Combining them, we get a total of $468.08. Later on in Chapter 6 and later in Chapter 13, we'll talk about taxes on your paycheck, but right now the gross earnings are just what you earn before taxes. In question 2, we're going to have a similar question where we're given some information about a worker, but it's just a slightly different way of how to calculate their gross earnings. Okay. So looking at question 2, very similar start, where we have the week's worth of hours worked. Okay. Only this time they're highlighting that the employee is paid using the overtime premium method. The overtime premium method really says that whenever you work, you get paid your regular wages or your regular rate of pay for all hours worked. That's kind of like your 100%, your regular time worked. And then overtime hours get a 50% premium. Now, where am I getting that 50% premium? That's right here where it says overtime is paid at time and a half. That 50% is the extra half that you're paid. So the time and a half is like 1.5. So here's your 100%, that one that you're paid initially. And then here's the extra half that you're paid for overtime. We're going to start part A and part B just like we did in question 1. We're going to take our hours worked in the week and add them all up. Let's start there. When I calculate all the hours, I get 50.25 hours. Back on our question, remember that 40 hours are considered regular, and anything above the 40 hours goes here in the overtime category. So if we had 50.25 total, and we used 40 for regular hours, then the remaining 10.25 hours are overtime hours. To find the overtime premium, okay, so premium just means above and beyond your regular rate of pay. So the overtime premium is that 50% premium, the extra half. So the 50% premium is 0.5 for half, or 0.5 for 50%, and that is 50% of your regular rate of pay, $8.60 in this question. Half of $8.60 is $4.30. So this is above and beyond what your normal rate of pay would be. On your overtime hours, you're going to get an extra $4.30 on top of the regular rate of pay. Part D and E are also calculated slightly different than what we'd used in question 1. Part D, to find the regular earnings, we're going to take all hours worked. Not just regular hours, but all hours worked. All 50.25 hours worked. And multiply that by the regular rate of pay. And our regular rate of pay for this question was $8.60. All hours worked times $8.60 is $432.15. So keep in mind, you've already been paid for $8.60 for every one of the hours worked. All of the 50 hours have already been paid for. Part E says find the overtime premium earnings. So we're going to use our overtime premium, which is the extra half. That was the premium rate of pay, right here, the $4.30, only for the overtime hours. So we're going to take the overtime hours, which is our 10.25 hours, and multiply by that by the overtime premium. So for those 10.25 hours, you get an extra $4.30. and that gives us a total of $44.08. The last part is finding the total gross earnings, and that would be similar. We're going to take our regular earnings plus our overtime earnings. Our regular earnings for this question were $432.15. Our overtime earnings were $44.08. And total, that gives us $476.23. I'm going to discuss one more question before I stop the video. Okay. The next question is also looking at calculating wages. However, it's going to use still a different method. So in the third method, overtime is still time and a half. So notice that overtime is still paid at time and a half. Only this time we're using overtime as any hours over 8 hours in a day. So in order for us to calculate our regular hours and our overtime hours, we're going to have to look at each day individually. To do this, I like to make a chart. So here's my regular hours and here's my overtime hours. And I'm going to work on that right here above the calendar that they gave us. Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, and Saturday. On Sunday, no hours were worked. So we don't have any regular hours and we don't have any overtime hours. On Monday, 9 hours were worked. The first 8 hours go in regular, and then the other hours, there would be one more hour to total 9, would be overtime, so that your regular and your overtime total up to 9. On Tuesday, again, the first 8 hours go to regular, and the extra 0.75 hours go to overtime. So really, I'm subtracting 8 from each one of these to get the overtimes. On Wednesday, there were 7 regular hours, but no overtime. On Thursday, 8 hours regular and only 0.5 overtime. On Friday, there would be 8 hours regular and 2 overtime. And on Saturday, nothing was worked. So let's get our total regular hours. I'm going to add up my regular hours along the chart. 8 plus 8 plus 7 plus 8 plus 8 is 39 regular hours. Notice that it doesn't have to be 40 hours or more. It's just how many hours in a day you are above 8. So 8 hours in a day are regular, and anything above that is overtime. Take a look at the overtime hours and add up what's there. 1 plus 0.75 plus 0.5 plus 2, and I calculate 4.25 overtime hours. Now let's go down to part A, B, C. The number of regular hours worked was something we already calculated, 39 regular hours. The number of overtime hours worked, we also calculated here in the second row, 4.25 overtime hours. Part C, overtime rate is time and a half. So time and a half, we're going back to 1.5 times our $9.85 regular rate. Okay. So only the overtime premium method separates out, like question 2. So if I take 1.5 times 9.85, we have an overtime rate of $14.78 per hour. Per overtime hour. Part D is finding our regular earnings. Similar to before, we're going to take our regular hours times our regular rate of pay. Our regular hours were 39 this time, and our regular rate of pay was $9.85. That gives us a total of $384.15 for our regular earnings. To calculate our overtime earnings, we're going to take our overtime hours times our overtime rate of pay. Our overtime hours were 4.25 hours, and our overtime rate of pay was $14.78, giving us a total of $62.82. And part F, our total gross earnings, similar to our previous questions. We're going to take our regular earnings plus our overtime earnings. $384.15 and $62.82 for a gross total of $446.97 for our gross earnings. And gross really means the total amount you've earned before taxes.